From the leaders in supply chain resilience and sustainability, this is the TAPA APAC Podcast. TAPA is an international forum that focuses on reducing losses in supply chains through globally recognized standards, certification audits, and real-time supply chain information incident system. Today, we are honored to have our host, Mr. Tony Lugg, Chairman of TAPA APAC, and invited speaker, Mr. Ramesh Raj, Regional Manager of Pharmaceutical Security Institute Singapore, to be with us and share his views and knowledge about the topic today. How can supply chain resilience help to reduce the growing threat of counterfeit drugs? Now, over to our host today, Tony.
Hey, Ramesh, good day to you. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks, Tony. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon and, to talk about pharmaceutical resilience. Ramesh, look, I know this wasn't the intention of the podcast, but it's highly topical with the global pandemic going on. The coronavirus, it's causing devastation around the globe, and we've seen some of the issues that we've had from originally from China, and then we see those issues repeating across the world. One thing that came up, Ramesh, was that TAPA had received reports of personal protective equipment being stolen. Apparently there were 2 shipments stolen, which came out of China and were going in through air gateways in Europe. So, what sort of impact are you guys having in the pharmaceutical industry?
Tony, this is a very sensitive topic, but very timely topic as well. And thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts on some of the seriousness issues that is actually taking place during this trying times. Yes, some of the members actually did inform me on the impact of the coronavirus in the supply chain itself. But from a security aspect, right, I know that the security teams are putting in a lot of effort in ensuring that the supply chain remains resilient. But that said, despite all these efforts that's being taking place right now, if you've seen the recent Interpol article, it was stated that the pandemic has actually opened up a great business opportunity for criminals. Like what you mentioned, you had cases of surgical masks being stolen, but authorities around the world nearly seized more than 34,000 actually, to be more accurate, counterfeit surgical masks. And law enforcement officers identified more than 2,000 cyber links to products related to COVID-19. And, the results of Interpol's operation clearly reveals a very worrying trend and in the increase in unauthorized antiviral medication, anti-malarial, chloroquine, vitamin C, which is of course known for its immune boosting properties, and other food supplements are also seized around the world. So it is a very worrying trend that you see now, the sudden spike. But yes, I think there are a lot of efforts that are being still undertaken by the members and everyone in the legit supply chain as well. But you can see while the world still bends together to combat COVID-19, there will still be unscrupulous criminals aiming to make a quick buck during this time.
No, absolutely. And look, it's unbelievable that people would take advantage of this awful situation that we are facing within the globe, with people losing their jobs,
right.
Medical services stretched to the limit. So I suppose, to all our listeners, I would urge them to ensure they report these items in confidence, to either Ramesh or to TAPA. And look, we will, certainly TAPA will broadcast those out to the members, because the more eyes that we have, looking at this, and also look, don't forget, Ramesh, for TAPA and for the members listening, TAPA has a lot of, similar to yourselves, we have a lot of contacts in law enforcement, including customs. So, if some products are stolen and they're going to be shipped out of the country, customs will be scrutinizing those shipments and looking at them a little bit closer. So look, thank you for giving us an overview, and that's something that we should definitely take on board. So look,
Sure.
Ramesh, counterfeit medicine, right? Deliberately and fraudulently mislabeled, to either respect the identity of or source of another product. Obviously you've got brand issues there.
Right.
They're targeting these, as you said earlier, some of these generic products. And of course, the issue is that even if they are counterfeiting, unfortunately, they're doing it with raw material that doesn't meet the active ingredients that doesn't meet the specification. And of course, look, the other issue you have is that the reason using the counterfeit packaging to package and sell these drugs. So, from your point of view and your association, what's the sort of issues that the members face?
In this aspect, right? Firstly, when you talk about counterfeit, it's an issue of interpretation, right? There are no international consensus regarding the definition of counterfeit medicine. But the US FDA defines counterfeit medicines as fake medicines. Like what you mentioned, it may be counterfeited, it may be contaminated, or contain the wrong or no active ingredients at all, right? Or it could have actually active ingredients, but with the wrong dose. But regardless, notwithstanding that, counterfeit drugs are illegal and will be harmful to your health. So having said that, the WHO defines counterfeit medicine as a product that is deliberately or fraudulently mislabeled with respect to the source and or its identity. Right? And counterfeiting can apply to both generics or branded, because a lot of people think it's only on branded, but it can apply for both generics and branded as well. And of course, as I mentioned, it does, counterfeit products always, it's either the correct ingredients or the lack of it, active ingredients or the lack of it, and fake packaging as well. But the thing I want to say is that regardless of what definition you look at, one must understand that the dangers of consuming fake medication, especially fake medications to treat chronic illnesses. I think that is something that is very serious.
No, absolutely. And of course, look, a lot of these drugs end up in I would say the poorer countries or emerging markets, and where medicine may be slightly more expensive. But if we look at some of these criminal networks that are out there, these guys seem to be producing a diverse range of medicines, including the drugs to treat serious illnesses such as cancer.
Right.
So, what can be done about these criminal networks, and what sort of efforts are ongoing to tackle this?
Honestly, this is a tough one, but thank you for asking. Counterfeit is actually often dubbed as the world's second oldest profession. Counterfeiting clearly has stood the test of time. And therefore, to destroy such networks will definitely require commitment, compliance, and consideration from industry, regulators, and law enforcement. And of course, the public at large. I know I sound like textbook because this is what I echo in every country that I go to, and when I present to each and every law enforcement outfits. It's commitment, compliance, and consideration from not one, but every party in the room. There are several reports actually clearly providing clear evidence in the connection between transnational organized crime and the illicit trafficking of counterfeit goods. To eradicate this problem obviously requires a multi-pronged approach. If you notice in an article published by the UNODC, United Nations for Drugs and Crime, who PSI supports every year in their annual report, some of the recommendations were actually mentioned were strengthening countries' money laundering legislation, looking into the cross-border multi-sector partnership, embracing technology, capacity building, and of course, law enforcement and financial institutions working together. For many years, this may sound like a taboo, but now it's a marriage in the making. Law enforcement and financial institutions working together. But of course, this is easier said than done. To carry out legislative changes requires substantial amount of time. And by the time a change is made, the criminal and the trending may have evolved. So at most times, the legislation is always playing catch up. And like what you mentioned, between developed and developing countries, technology does not come cheap. And developing countries may need to prioritize where and how their budget is being spent. So capacity building is one of the key ongoing efforts that we undertake. And still, a lot of things are very much dependent on the commitment. But in total, there is actually no one silver bullet that can destroy criminal syndicates overnight.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Yeah, agree. It needs to be a combined effort. And look, I was interested that you mentioned the word technology, because having actually completed a supply chain visibility project myself, we were able to track part level visibility from the time it left the OEM or the manufacturer to the time it was delivered. There's clearly is an opportunity there. How do you think supply chain visibility could actually help in identifying gaps or counterfeit shipments as such?
I would say that companies actually must resist the challenges looming from supply chain security lapses to avoid the infiltration of counterfeit, diverted, and adulterated drugs from entering into the supply chain. I think that is the key, most fundamental thing. And apart from having an end-to-end visibility and traceability within the supply chain, perhaps effective serialization programs will be one of the key factors that companies can consider. And obviously, this will give a competitive advantage for these companies. I mean, revenues from pharma and biopharma counterfeit market is estimated to be in the region of 200 billion, maybe more. No one keeps accurate stats on that. And companies must align their anti-counterfeiting strategy to the corporate supply chain strategy as well. So, and focusing on supply chain monitoring, such as serialization, track and trace, hologram tagging. I could go on the list, there are many efforts undertaken, without going into the specifics, undertaken by the companies and my members as well. But we must understand that the counterfeiters are agile and have found ways to bypass these steps very quickly, because legitimate companies go through R&D, they go through a rigid program to ensure that whatever money that's being spent on security issues is accounted for. It makes sense at the end of the day. But criminals don't have to worry about that. They just watch what you're doing, improve on it, and in some cases come out to be better. Pharmaceutical companies and other companies as well, and regulators are always developing techniques to stop criminals. And I think this will always be an ongoing effort.
Yeah, no, I agree. But the interesting thing is that as the globe changed, as the supply changed, and with the introduction of e-commerce, that opened up new channels for these criminal groups. And if I can remember back in 2004, FedEx was charged with the illegal trafficking of prescription drugs. Okay,
right.
Yeah,
right.
That case was later dropped, right? But in the case of UPS, they were fined 40 million for apparently, the same form of methodology. So those are two sort of examples of where one company was charged and obviously suffered the bad publicity of that. And the other obviously had the financial impact of that. But what would be your advice to sort of lower the risk in the e-commerce marketplace?
Okay, so you bring up one of the two biggest cases, in the last decade to come up. But without going into the specifics of each case and without scrutinizing the evidence, that was made available, I think we need to look at the commonalities here, right? In both cases, the defendants, both UPS and FedEx, they are freight forwarders. And in this issue, having understood the case, it is an issue of actually knowledge and willful blindness, or the lack of it. Right. In a more recent case in Singapore, in 2019, actually, it was a very similar case as well against Megastar Shipping. It was a huge case where the judges of appeal actually stated that enforcing intellectual property rights had to be balanced against overextending liability to those who were wholly unaware of the infringing sign. This is a very big statement. It echoes on this, that willful blindness, to what extent is the role played by the freight forwarders in this industry. And of course, the court found there was no evidence against the freight forwarder Megastar, and there was no reason to believe that those trademark signs or sealed goods and documents were actually indicated household goods and seemingly generic merchandise. So there was no suspicion. So having said that, to your question on lowering the risk in the e-commerce space now, right? I would say that anyone involved in dealing prescription drugs must know the do's and don'ts. E-commerce operators have a big role down here, because now they are the direct link to consumers, and therefore they shouldn't work in silo. I would say that they would have to work with brand owners and regulators alike. I mean, we are now at an age where everyone is working towards a common goal, but there will be a price to pay at some point in time for willful blindness. That's my take on that.
Yeah, Ramesh, I fully agree. I understand that they're not the police of the supply chain. However, based on some of my experience when I was on the Express Carrier Association, working committee for security, look, it was apparent that on some occasions, these smugglers, as you said earlier, very, very agile and ingenious in some respects, okay, or creative. But what they were actually doing was engaging the salespeople and trying to, to get them to put them through other accounts, which were actually had a, sort of a green lane status. And look, there was another sort of case of smuggling of drugs, okay, actual Class A drugs.
Right.
And they were using a third-party customer account to do that. So,
Right.
I do agree with you, okay, that, that the limits of liability can't extend across the supply chain. However, there are on occasions things that express carriers could do.
Right, it's true, and I will echo the same thing as what you're saying. As I travel around the APAC region as well, and when I intensify my engagement with the regional customs and their offices as well, the same problem always surfaces. But the actual solution is collaboration. A one-word answer that I keep repeating is collaboration. Gone are the days where everybody hides in a black hole and operates from within there. It is no longer. Times have changed, and everything is in the World Wide Web. And internet is a wonderful thing. It creates and it destroys. So collaboration is the way forward.
Yep, I agree, and certainly, I think there's got to be a lot of education to some of these teams, sales teams, particularly, that they may be approached. Yeah. So one interesting case that came to mind was the Operation Pangea. This is where the European law enforcement agencies arrested like more than 800 people worldwide. I mean, unbelievable. But they seized dangerous goods like roughly valued at about $14 million US, and that included out-of-date heart surgery instruments, which were smuggled, contraceptive pills hidden inside DVD. Packages, that was sort of in Eastern Europe. So from your studies and from the, analysis that's going on with government agencies and the rest of it, I mean, how big and, how many transactions do you think we're actually are encountering globally?
First of all, when you talk about Pangea, this operation is very close to my heart. I have been actively involved in this since actually in the second year of Operation Pangea, 2009. And I've actually witnessed this program grow from, when we first started it. We had a handful of countries, maybe 10, 12 pushing it. But now, we see hundreds of countries coming together in the last few Pangea operation. Throughout all these years, I mean, we have seen more than 100 million units of medication seized, more than about 3,000 arrests being made. And over time, it creates an opportunity and combines the effort of the police, the customs, regulatory bodies, and private sectors come together and prevent potentially dangerous medicine from reaching unsuspecting consumers, right? And during this course of the many Pangea operations, there were several networks that were actually being stopped. You already know the figures. It's all available in open source as well. But to your questions, clearly, yes, there are hundreds of such transactions takes place like this day to day. But we have to understand, look at the region that's being affected, which is worldwide, and look at the resources that are allocated in combating this. Where there are other serious crime that is also taking place at the same point in time. When you talk about terrorism, the import and export of arms smuggling, Class A drugs, and versus this. So resources have to be allocated according to the priority as well. So in some cases, we have made some good detection, but with every good detection, there are cases that's lost. But again, so what we do is that we go and we provide a lot more sharing intelligence with this law enforcement and try to get some targeted approaches, hits, and we try to carry that out. So it is definitely not a challenge that can be conquered overnight. And again, it requires industry and law enforcement to come together to work hand in hand. Again, this is something easier said than done. I keep repeating this. It's something easier said than done.
Yeah, because look, I agree with you, and look, I'm fully on board with collaboration, and certainly within TAPA, that's one thing that we're always trying to do.
Right.
is collaborate, more with, like associations like yourselves and law enforcement. But, sometimes when we're partnering with, some of the global organizations, I sometimes wonder about the speed of change. And look, I know that the WHO published or adopted a resolution, I think it's over 30 years ago, and this was really to initiate programs for the prevention and detection, export, import, or smuggled or falsely labeled,
Right.
counterfeited, goods, etc. So it's always nice to have that on paper, but is that resolution actually effective?
All right. So you spoke about WHO, but let me sell a bit on PSI as well in this aspect, right? So PSI, Pharmaceutical Security Institute, is actually a not-for-profit organization that was established over 20 years ago and currently supported by security directors of 37 international pharmaceutical manufacturers. While our head office is in DC, Washington, DC, we have a global presence coming up from Miami, Florida, from Sweden, and as well as Singapore. And in our collaboration efforts with our members, we regularly collect and analyze information that is related to counterfeiting, illegal diversion, and the theft of pharmaceuticals. And of course, this information is then disseminated to law enforcement and drug regulatory authorities. At this point in time, many of our security directors and their staff on a daily basis work with these authorities, specifically to stamp out the flow of illegal, unapproved, and dangerous fake medicines. And in this manner, so PSI partners, of course, with Interpol in their efforts. And now we have partnering more aggressively with the Department of Homeland Security, US FDA, and other international and regional law enforcement agencies to combat pharmaceutical crime. But if you ask me how successful we are, again, success is very relative. It all depends on what we coin to be a success. It's still an ongoing effort, and it will still be ongoing for many years to come.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you. Look, it's a difficult situation to try and pull everyone across into one forum, and as you said, look, there's other priorities to be tackled at the same time. However, I think there's several case studies out there which show how counterfeiting, some credit card and other financial fraud is actually funding terrorism. So look, if we know that we have this group, etc., and what I'm thinking of is as I'm talking to you, is that in terms of from where the counterfeit drug is manufactured to the time where it's consumed, obviously that's going through cross borders, all right? So, look, we already know, right? Customs do a great job, okay? However,
yes, they do.
They're overloaded, right? These guys are, they've got a lot of data, they've got a lot of freight moving across the world, right? So, what help? What can we do? What can the industry do? What can society do to really help customs actually combat the counterfeit drugs in a better way?
Okay. When I'm in my travels in the region, I've been asked very similar questions, like through the observation in the Asia Pacific countries. Is there a possibility to set some similar standards in tracking and combating counterfeit drugs? That's exactly what you're asking here, right? But we must understand, given the fact that in Asia Pacific, it's a big region, Asia Pacific region. It consists of both developing and developed countries. So one cannot expect that the enforcement efforts carried out by the regional law enforcement outfits to be consistent across the region, right? This is something we know, and we must acknowledge this. In addition to that, there are infrastructure limitations, lean resource availability, differences in technological capabilities, among many others. But as you mentioned, Tony, despite all these differences, we can also agree that custom officers come together with other law enforcement to carry out amazing work, at our borders, and especially now how how volatile and how open it is. But still, they carry out diligence to ensure that the borders are not getaways for counterfeiters. They do a real good job. And to assist them further, what PSI does is that we partner with organizations like Interpol again, with the U.S. Patents and Trademark Office, the U.S. Department of Justice, and we carry out training and capacity building programs in the region, especially for customs and other law enforcement departments. And during this time, during these training sessions, we carry out, first of course, we do a lot of data sharing with them. We provide them, PSI especially provides them vital intelligence on the criminal trend in pharmaceutical crime in the region. We try to provide them with numbers, and we try to make an assessment as to what they need. So at this point in time, it's very much dependent on the customs to come out and say, hey, we need more assistance in a particular area, if it's on product identification. So what we will do is that we will create an opportunity. We get our members to come in, and we will create an opportunity and a training program for them to talk about what are the specifics to look out for. It embarks on education and more create an awareness program as well, and a training session all in one program. So we continue to do that, and of course, with people get promoted, they get changed into different regions, new blood, younger officers come in, and we continue the program again and again and again. So it's an ongoing effort. So by then, numbers would have changed, patterns would have changed, trends would have changed as well. So these are the things we keep updating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad you touched upon, sharing of information. But look, before I talk to you about that, because I think that's quite a big subject on its own. Look, I just want to, we spoke about the supply chain visibility. And look, as you were talking, one thing that came to mind was, the digitalization. So look, I do see, and no doubt you've seen, an increase advertisements of job roles involving digitalization, and I know there's a very crossover between supply chain visibility if it's used correctly. But look, as we were talking about customs, where we have that digitalization and where we have more of that data flows, and even look, I'm not going to ask you any questions on blockchain, right? But we know the concept of the blockchain, of being able to basically track the raw material ingredients, through production, and basically to the finished product, and the finished product to the customer. So, how do you think, right? How do you think that would actually help customs in lowering the risk?
Okay, so as you correctly pointed out, Tony, supply chain visibility and digitalization are two buttons in a same shirt. They belong together, but there are distinctive differences. But of course, we are now at the digital age, and we now have traceability standards that we did not have before. We are using digitalized systems to track products from the time they're raw material stage to the end consumer, right? But we have evolved. I mean, like from the 80s, companies were using packaging with holograms, if you remember. And of course, when we hit Y2K, we started using new ink technology, such as the invisible and color shifting products that came to age, as well as, if I remember correctly, the laser reading printing as well. And so these were technologies back then were very difficult to copy, you would agree. But counterfeiters still found a way to replicate the techniques. I mean, counterfeiters always find a way. And for us, like many pharmaceutical companies, then experimented with simple RFID tags, barcodes, and other technologies designed to track and authenticate drugs between manufacturer and patients. Companies still continue to develop state-of-the-art security packaging with relative success, with some success. But, when you digitalize, we have to understand that when we digitalize the supply chain, there will be benefits, right? That's why we digitalize it. I mean, it goes well beyond the track and trace because it gives the companies are now able to see the significant improvements in the inventory management, manufacturing timelines, gives an opportunity for companies to get better forecasting capabilities, real-time understanding on the issues at hand, and so on and so forth, right? And by embracing technology, of course, the company becomes a conduit for tighter industry-wide controls, auditing, and revenue protection. But there's always two sides to a story. But with technology evolving every other second, this will, it will always be, there will never be a single security technology to combat counterfeiting. And where there are gaps, counterfeiters will come in. So the challenge here, for me at least, I think, goes beyond compliance. And I would say that, the move forward would be to plan today by anticipating tomorrow's challenges. So create a technology, a platform, your security measure that not settles today's problem, but by understanding what the problem is going to be tomorrow. So that's how I would tackle it.
Yeah, because I agree. And look, I see a rollover into basically the drug distribution channel. And look at where it's been established by law in many countries to ensure that the nation's drugs are of the correct quantity, efficiency, and safety. So look, sometimes these channels are undermined and infiltrated, as you mentioned. Okay, so
right.
So you find that the counterfeit drugs are found alongside the genuine or legitimate drugs. So what can be done there to tackle this?
Yeah, Tony, you are an expert in the supply chain industry, and you know that there are many modes of supply chain, from the simple ones to the very complex. And the modern supply chain for pharmaceutical is rather complex. Medicines are made from ingredients sourced from many different countries, right? And the final formulations are then exported. It's the packaging, the repackaging, and the sale can happen in many different countries. Medicines change hands many times before. In between the manufacturer and the patient. Each and every transaction, right, is an opportunity for criminals to go in and falsify and put in substandard products to infiltrate the market, right? If you were to, there's also another reason. Articles, there are many articles just coming up. I'm not sure because of COVID or it's very timely for everybody to come up with their studies. But the OECD, the Economic Cooperation and Development, in their report, it was stated that there was a growing use of counterfeiters and other illicit traders to use small shipments to cloak their activities, right? We have seen this being a regulator then and now a voice for the industry. We have seen this between 2014 to 2016 alone. There was a substantial increase in the number of seizures for all products worldwide using postal shipments, express couriers, air transport, and sea transport followed, right? So there is a substantial increase in this. But so far, the pharmaceutical industry has done reasonably well. I use the word reasonably, very selectively, reasonably well. But we will not be complacent, because we understand that the moment, you lose focus on even one gap, plugging one gap, you then open several gaps. So for manufacturers and to each and every supply chain operators, even though a consumer has a role to play in this aspect, right? It's not only the manufacturers, it's not only the supply chain, it also goes all the way up to the consumer. As the buying stops, the selling stops. Simple concept. Especially now that we live in a time where the power of information is in our palm. So consumers cannot say that they are innocent or what in that sense. But to lessen the impact, I think, as I mentioned earlier, improving authentication technologies, using blockchain data management, brand owners have their trademarks registration, simple things like that. If you register your trademark, action can be taken by law enforcement. Don't let our lapse in one aspect create an opportunity for another. So that's what I would say. But I think this is something I wanted to echo as well. More importantly, we must ensure that the entities with financial interests in such imports, bear some responsibility. No one officer or government resource alone can stem this kind of trafficking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I was in the say to you, the profits that the criminal gangs are getting are significant. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the business of counterfeiting drugs. And look, I like your comment on the brand protection side, because sometimes the brand protection punishments can go further than the criminal ones, because obviously they're different courts, and sometimes the powers of the civil court are much stronger than the criminal court.
Right.
So look, in terms of the governments, look, everyone understands the problem here. Everyone understands the problem of the impact of the counterfeit drugs, but I sometimes ask myself, are governments, are the people responsible there for drawing up the legislation, as you said earlier, are they actually joined up? Is there that collaboration between governments, right, and the relevant organizations to ensure that fight against counterfeit drugs actually takes place? Are they there?
Okay, so all right. So in essence, you're asking if there has been any success in the links with the government, and if they are collaborating within themselves, right?
Yeah.
So okay, all right. So firstly, I mean, this is not TAPA's or PSI's fight alone in order, to fight to combat pharmaceutical crime. But I wish to think that PSI, like TAPA, is in a very ideal position to successfully propel new working initiatives to cripple this pharmaceutical crime, right? But however, in order to weather the test of time, PSI, I mean, together with our members, our law enforcement partners, and non-law enforcement partners as well, we continue to work in hand to combat pharmaceutical crime. But I think my take is that between the industry and the government, there are three big components which I echo always. That we need to be direct, we need to be engaged, we need to be collaborative. I mean, if you look at it, direct, engaged, I mean, it's self-explanatory. But again, it takes a lot of effort to get this done. The only way forward is to continue our efforts in engaging government agencies at the highest level possible. Global crime problems require global solutions, right? International cooperation among private and public sector stakeholders have resulted in significant seizures. We have seen that. And the destruction of unsafe medicine. We have seen that as well. The public sector and private sector entities must continue to seek out additional global opportunities to engage in a cooperation to fight counterfeit drugs. Only then, I think criminals, if not criminal, otherwise criminals will continue to exploit the weaknesses that we have anywhere in the world. For having said that, so it's a continuous engagement with the governments, and any change in government, there are change in role, and therefore the priorities between the governments will change as well. So what PSI does, and I presume TAPA does as well, we engage, we keep this engagement ongoing. If there's a new government that's been formed, and we try to reach out to them, tell them what we do, how we have been successful previously, and what we need to go ahead with, and what are the pipeline plans. And hopefully, we keep them engaged.
No, absolutely. So look, Ramesh, that takes me back to the question on the information sharing. Okay, so look, the approach from TAPA is that as I mentioned earlier, we've been trying to work with law enforcement agencies, including customs, and look, I think TAPA can probably boast to have the largest global crime database, cargo crime database in the world. And look, in literally in TAPA EMEA, and don't forget, these are only the reported incidents, okay? But that accumulated to 8,548. And look, the losses were over 137 million euros. But look, let me just say this: that this is only the incidents which have actually been reported to TAPA, right? So the actual number of incidences are much higher, and look, the EU has previously published figures, and so has the FBI on that. But look, going back to the sharing of information, we encourage our members to report that. So look, in that reporting mechanism, we operate a no blame culture. It's not about punishing any providers or anything of that nature. What it is, it's about, as you quite rightly said earlier, it's about that collaboration and sharing that data with law enforcement agencies. So, what is, in terms of sharing of information, have you any examples of where the sharing of that information has resulted in a successful law enforcement activity? And have you got any examples that you're able to share with us?
Okay, I won't go into the specifics because of confidential issues as well. But course, like TAPA, PSI, we I mean, this is what I know of. I don't see any other agencies, but PSI is the only one actually who keeps track of counterfeit issues in terms of pharmaceutical crime anywhere in the world. And PSI, we have three main objectives here, right? It's firstly protecting public health, sharing vital intelligence information on counterfeits, and initiating enforcement actions. So this is what you're asking, how we manage and how we share. We have been doing this for the last 20 years or so. So we have to realize that, governments like law enforcement need to be they change, and we need to always keep them updated. So in this aspect, what we do is that PSI, every now and then, every year, if I can use that word, on an annual basis as well, we provide data, we provide intelligence to Interpol, to UNODC for them to publish their articles on the crime in the region and around the world as well. And of course, we have maintained some good working relationship with the current government officials in the region and the decision makers as well. So of course, some have yielded good results, but where others, sometimes it goes quiet. But again, it's a hit and miss situation. So that's one of the reasons why I can't go into the specifics. But of course, in that sense, I wouldn't stop only with working with law enforcement. In the last couple of years, PSI has adopted a working relationship that is even extended to the non-traditional partners like financial institutions, social platform operators, and operators in the supply chain like yourself, among others as well. And so at this point in time, when you say success, I would measure success in terms of the awareness that we have created and continue to create. This is an ongoing effort, and I think we can only say that we have been successful when the day comes that we have completely eradicated pharmaceutical crime. Won't happen tomorrow, though.
No, absolutely. And look, I think you're right. That it's only fair that I simply point out the good work done by Amazon and similar e-commerce organizations, where Amazon are proactively, working extremely hard to actually try and choke, as I like to call it, try and choke that counterfeit supply chain. And I know that they're constantly looking at what's been advertised, and obviously where it can't be traced, they're tackling that issue. So look, some great work going on behind the scenes, Right. Ramesh, look, I think you've given us some amazing insights into what your organization's doing, and obviously this is protecting the health of citizens globally. All right, so it's crucial and critical work. Look, most importantly, I think the supply chain vigilance is something that can go across all of us. I think all of us have got a corporate social responsibility to definitely whilst we're not assuming the liability of policing it, we all have that responsibility to basically stop this occurring. So look, I just want to thank you for spending your time with us today. And look, I look forward to doing another session with you in the future. So thanks very much, Ramesh.
Yeah, and then thanks, Tony, and then thanks to TAPA APAC also for inviting me for this podcast. This is my first for every listener, so please be kind. If there's anything that you would like to find about the Pharmaceutical Security Institute, you can visit PSI's website at www.psi-inc.org. And obviously we'll be posting this in LinkedIn, and my details are there as well. And before we say, I say at least, thank you, and have a good good day. This goes out to actually, I'm great, thankful for all the frontline officers and personnel and healthcare workers out there, saving our lives and keeping us safe from COVID. Right. So, Tony, thank you very much again for having me.
Thank you, Ramesh. Fully agree with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the TAPA APAC Podcast. If you like what you heard, subscribe to our mailing list at www.tapa-apac.org to get our latest updates. You can also find TAPA's International Supply Chain Standards on our website. If you have any suggestions and feedback on our podcast, feel free to drop us an email. We look forward to seeing you in our next podcast. Goodbye.